6 wealthy women threw her out of the party into the rain, simply because they assumed she was part of the catering staff. What they didn't know was that the woman in the simple black dress was the wife of the man who held the power to make or break this entire neighborhood. The grand hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, but every gaze was fixed on Evelyn. No diamond ring, no designer bag, only eyes far too calm to belong to the help. One woman scoffed, "She must be at the wrong event." Evelyn didn't answer. She held out her invitation, her hand trembling slightly but never retreating. Seconds later, the string of lights outside flickered in rapid bursts. A sleek Tesla glided up, stopping directly in front of the entrance. The door swung open, and the person who stepped out froze the entire party in stunned silence. The apartment door clicked shut behind her. Evelyn slipped off her coat, its hem still damp, and hung it neatly on the worn wooden hook. She walked slowly inside. The room was quiet, bathed in a soft amber glow. Books lined the walls, old covers, frayed spines, arranged in the order of years gone by. She caught her reflection in the small mirror near the window. Loosened from its high bun, her hair revealed silver strands threaded through the black. She looked closely, not out of vanity, but to ask herself, "What did I do wrong?" She opened the wardrobe. Inside hung only a few white t-shirts, a handful of simple cotton dresses. No rings, no designer bags, nothing that would have said she belonged at that gala. Yet every item here was something she had chosen, paid for with her own life, 20 years earlier. A quiet bookstore on the south side. Evelyn stood behind the checkout, sorting returns. She wore a plain gray sweater, glasses slightly crooked, hair tied back in a simple knot. Charles Moore walked in, tall, curious, holding a worn copy of Beloved. He asked, "Do you ever think Toni Morrison writes like she's been holding her breath, and finally lets it out?" Evelyn looked up, surprised. "Only people who felt silenced say things like that," he smiled. "James Baldwin does that to me too. Makes me feel seen." She nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, someone spoke her language, without asking where she learned it. They didn't flirt. They didn't need to. The silence between their words was already full. It didn't begin with love. It began with understanding, and that was deeper. The living room was quiet. Too quiet. Evelyn sat on the edge of a velvet sofa, hands folded in her lap. Across from her, Charles's mother studied her like a specimen. She sipped her tea, then asked, "What does your family do in Ghana?" Evelyn held her gaze. "My mother was a teacher. My father ran a small printing shop." The silence thickened. Charles stood nearby, jaw tense. His mother didn't respond. Just set the teacup down, deliberately. "This isn't what I imagined for my son," she said softly but sharp. Charles stepped forward. "Then imagine nothing. Because if you can't accept Evelyn, you won't have me either." His mother blinked. "Charles?" But he was already taking Evelyn's hand. They left together. No more words. Only a door that didn't close gently behind them. Their apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, creaky stairs. But it was enough. Evelyn worked mornings at the library, taught English to immigrants at night. She'd come home tired, shoes dusty, eyes soft. Charles offered to cover more bills. Evelyn always smiled and shook her head. "I need to earn what I give. I want to have worth that's mine." There were no designer bags, no catered dinners, just lentil soup, second-hand books, and laughter that echoed off peeling walls. She didn't resent the struggle. She wore it like skin. Charles once said, "You make simple things feel sacred." Evelyn only replied, "That's how my mother raised me, rich in meaning, not in money." Outside, the world moved fast. Inside their space, time was slow, and love had room to breathe. The church basement smelled faintly of chalk and old coffee, folded chairs, handwritten name tags. Evelyn stood at the whiteboard, pointing slowly to each word. Book, table, smile. A pause after every syllable, letting it sink in. The women listened closely. Haiti, Syria, Nigeria, each one holding more pain than English words could contain. She handed out old children's books, soft and worn. A little girl in the back opened hers, traced the letters with her finger, then read aloud, B. B. The room froze. Then came claps, gasps, and tears. The girl looked up, eyes wide, then ran to Evelyn and hugged her tight, as if afraid she might disappear. Evelyn knelt and whispered, "You did that, all by yourself." This wasn't charity. It was dignity being returned, word by word, page by page. Charles leaned against the kitchen counter, holding a newspaper. On the front page, Moore Foundation donates $2 million to education initiatives. His name was bold. Evelyn's was nowhere. He looked up. "You know, we could change that. Let people know who really started it." Evelyn stirred the pot on the stove, quiet for a moment. Then she turned, calm and steady. "I don't need a headline. I need more girls to read." Charles stepped closer. "You built this. Don't you want them to see you?" Evelyn met his eyes. "I want them to see themselves. If I'm too visible, I become the exception. I want them to believe they belong without needing to be anyone's wife." He didn't argue, just watched her, both proud and a little heartbroken. Some people chase spotlight. Evelyn chose silence, with purpose. A knock at the door, light, hesitant. Lena, one of Evelyn's students, stepped in holding a gold envelope. "This came for you. Thought it looked fancy." Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel, opened the envelope carefully. Thick cardstock, shimmering print, Aurora Foundation Annual Charity Gala. She stared at the logo. Familiar, sharp. "They still do this for orphans, right?" Her voice was even, but something in her eyes shifted. A quiet shadow. Lena nodded. "That's what it says. Big donors, black tie event. Very exclusive." Evelyn didn't smile. She set the invitation on the table, next to a chipped mug and an open dictionary. "Exclusive," she repeated under her breath. The word sat heavy. This wasn't just a party, it was a mirror, and Evelyn had seen this reflection before. Charles sat on the edge of the bed, invitation in hand. He turned it over once, twice, then looked up. "Are you sure you want to go there?" Evelyn folded a sweater, placed it in the drawer, then paused. "I'm not going to be honored." She looked at him, voice steady. "I'm going to see if they still have a conscience." Charles nodded slowly. "They won't make it easy for you." "I don't need easy," she said. "I need the truth, and I want to look it in the eye." He reached for her hand, held it without words. Not out of permission, but respect. There was no glamour in her choice, no spotlight, only a quiet kind of courage that didn't need to prove itself, just show up. Evelyn stood by the small closet, fingers trailing across the fabric. She chose a black dress, simple, worn at the edges, the same one she wore to her mother's memorial. She sat at the mirror and pulled her hair into a low bun. No stylist, no makeup artist, just 2 bobby pins, and still her hands didn't shake. From a velvet box, she took out a pair of gold earrings. Modest, delicate. Her mother's, the only thing she had left of her. She clipped them on, one by one, then looked at herself in the mirror. Not to admire, to remember. Charles appeared behind her. "You look beautiful." Evelyn gave a faint smile, then stood. "It's not about looking right," she said. "It's about standing right." She reached for her coat, eyes calm but focused. "I don't need anyone to bow down. I just need someone to look me in the eye." And with that, she stepped toward the door, not dressed to impress, but dressed to be undeniable. The grand lobby shimmered with light. Strings of violins echoed under crystal chandeliers. Evelyn stepped through the front entrance, holding her invitation. She walked with quiet purpose, heels soft against the marble floor. Before she could reach the check-in table, the same young receptionist from before straightened up. Her smile faded. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify your invitation again." Evelyn handed it over without a word. The receptionist glanced at it, then at Evelyn. A pause. She leaned to whisper something to the manager nearby. He approached, adjusted his tie, and asked flatly, "Are you sure you're here for this event?" A man near the bar whispered to his companion, "Looks like hotel staff wandered in." Another guest laughed lightly, sipped champagne. Evelyn stood still, saying nothing. Not defensive, not proud, just steady. The manager looked again at the invitation. His eyes scanned her face as if waiting for a crack to appear, but she offered none. The same door she walked through. Now felt like a gate she wasn't meant to pass. Not because of who she was, but because of who they refused to see. Evelyn stepped into the ballroom. Bright white lights poured down from the chandeliers. The air shimmered with perfume, string music, and the soft clink of glass against glass. She walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but intention. Her dress, though plain, moved with quiet dignity. The heels were modest. The earrings glinted softly with each step. Heads turned, briefly. 1 second, maybe 2. Eyes scanned her, then looked away. Deliberate, dismissive. A group near the entrance paused mid-conversation. One woman smiled politely, then turned her back before Evelyn could respond. Waiters passed by without a glance. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words wrapped around her. She wasn't welcome, but she was seen. And then, like a wave returning to sea, the room resumed its rhythm. Music played on. Laughter rose. Glasses clinked, but Evelyn kept walking. Not invisible, just inconvenient. She didn't flinch, because when you've been overlooked your whole life, being watched, then ignored, feels oddly familiar. She appeared like a spotlight in human form. Clarissa Whitehall, blonde, polished, wrapped in silk the color of champagne, glided through the crowd with practiced grace. People parted for her like she owned the room, because she did. She spotted Evelyn and made a direct line across the floor. "Well," she said, extending a hand with a sparkling ring that caught the light, "I'm so glad the foundation made space this year for all walks of life." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Evelyn shook her hand, firm but brief. "Generosity should have no borders," she replied, calm. Clarissa gave a small laugh, the kind that ends in silence. "Isn't that noble of you?" She tilted her head, scanning Evelyn's dress like it was a thrift store curiosity. "Your presence adds a certain contrast to the room." Another smile, sharper this time. Then she turned and disappeared into a circle of donors in tuxedos. Evelyn stood still, heart steady. She had heard that tone before. The kind of kindness that tastes like control. The kind of welcome that feels like a test. Evelyn approached table 3. A crisp white card with her name was tucked neatly beside the centerpiece. She took a quiet breath and moved to sit. But a woman in a red dress was already there, legs crossed, glass of wine in hand. She glanced up, feigned confusion. "Oh, I think there's been a mix-up. This spot was held for someone from the board." She didn't wait for a reply, just smiled and turned back to her conversation. A man nearby looked up from his seat. "Staff usually eats in the service hall." Evelyn didn't respond. She stood for a moment, then turned toward an usher. "I was assigned to table 3, she said softly. The usher hesitated, scanned a list, then gave a polite nod. "Yes? There's a seat available near the kitchen. Table 14. No apology, no explanation. The new table was tucked behind a marble column, near swinging doors, out of view. She sat down alone. The cloth napkin felt heavier than it should, not because it was folded wrong, but because it carried the weight of where she wasn't allowed to be. Evelyn sat quietly at table 14. Silverware clinked in the distance. Waitstaff moved quickly in and out of the kitchen behind her. The laughter from the center of the ballroom felt miles away. A gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a young woman in black, headset tucked behind one ear. It was Lena, one of the event coordinators. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to stay?" Evelyn looked at her closely. The girl's eyes weren't cruel. They were concerned and tired. "You don't belong here," Lena added. "They've already decided that." Evelyn didn't blink. "Then that's exactly why I'm staying." Lena hesitated, glancing around like someone might overhear. "They'll make it worse, quietly. But they will." Evelyn's voice was calm. "Let them try." There was no anger, just the stillness of someone who'd already lived through louder storms. Lena gave a slow nod, stepped back into the crowd. Evelyn remained, still, unmoved. She had crossed the line they drew and refused to step back. Phones were out now. Guests posed under gold lighting, glasses tilted just right, filters smoothing every edge. A young influencer in a sequined gown walked past Evelyn's table, phone held high. "We're live from the Aurora Gala," she whispered to the camera, smile wide. "Only the city's best tonight." As she turned, Evelyn came into frame. Seated alone, dress plain, posture upright. The girl's smile faltered for a second. She leaned closer to her friend and kept the stream running. "Who is that lady?" she muttered, low, but not low enough. "She looks like housekeeping. How'd she even get in?" The comment wasn't aimed to hurt, but it did, not because Evelyn heard it, but because millions soon would. The camera lingered just long enough, then panned away, to sparkle, to wealth, to what was meant to be seen, and yet the damage was done. She hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a scene. But now she was part of the story, without permission and without protection. The clock had started ticking, and humiliation was already on its way. The lights dimmed. A soft hush fell over the ballroom as Clarissa Whitehall stepped onto the stage, heels tapping lightly across polished wood. She stood behind the microphone, smiling with poise, her diamond necklace catching the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice smooth, practiced. "Tonight is not about wealth or reputation. It's about compassion." Polite applause. She continued, "Aurora Foundation has always believed in lifting those who have less. Immigrants, refugees, the underrepresented. We are their voice when the world refuses to listen." Another round of applause, stronger this time. Evelyn sat still at her table in the shadows, watching. The words hung in the air like perfume. Sweet, but artificial. Clarissa gestured toward a large poster behind her. Smiling children of color, staged beside bowls of rice and books. "They need us, and we are here to give." More claps. A few guests wiped tears. Evelyn didn't blink. She knew the kind of kindness that lived in rooms like this, loud, proud, and performative, because true compassion didn't come with cameras, and it never wore heels on a stage. Evelyn rose from her seat. She'd had enough of staged smiles and empty praise echoing from the podium. Her chair scraped softly against the marble floor as she stepped into the center aisle, head high. As she moved toward the exit, a voice cut through the crowd. "Excuse me," a man near the dessert table said loudly, pointing. "I don't think that woman has a ticket." The room quieted. A ripple moved through the guests, turning heads, sideways glances. 2 security guards walked in from the side, slow and deliberate. "Ma'am," one of them said, stepping in front of her, "we need to check your credentials." Evelyn opened her clutch, pulled out the invitation, and extended it without a word. The guard examined it for a long second as if unsure what to believe, the printed name or the face behind it. People watched. Phones hovered. Another guest murmured, "She must have snuck in. Who wears that to a gala?" Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, not trembling, not backing down. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and the whole room was listening. Not to her, but to the silence they'd created around her. Clarissa approached with slow, elegant steps. The crowd parted for her again, just like it always did. Her smile was soft, her tone even softer. "I'm so sorry," she said, placing a hand on the security guard's arm. "But we can't let one guest ruin the atmosphere." She turned to Evelyn, voice dipped in velvet. "This event is delicate. I'm sure you understand." Evelyn didn't move. Clarissa continued, quieter now. "Some of our guests have expressed discomfort. It's best if we all enjoy the evening without unnecessary distractions." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. The guards stepped closer. One gestured toward the entrance. "Please, ma'am, let's not make a scene." People watched, but no one spoke. No one intervened. Evelyn looked at Clarissa, eyes calm. Then she turned, walking toward the exit, surrounded but untouched. Every step echoed in the silence. Not because she was escorted out, but because it was done so politely, so publicly, so finally, as if kindness, weaponized, was somehow worse than cruelty itself. The doors clicked shut behind her. Outside, the rain was soft but steady, soaking into the concrete and into the fabric of Evelyn's dress. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, still. Her shoulders rose and fell in a quiet breath as a droplet slid from her hairline down her neck. The elegant heels she wore now felt heavier with each second, water pooling around the toes. Behind her, through the tall glass doors, the gala glowed gold and warm. Laughter, clinking glasses, orchestral music, still playing, untouched by her absence. Inside, they had already moved on. She turned slightly to glance back. There she was, reflected in the glass. One figure, framed by the opulence she helped build, now shut out from it completely. Her reflection blurred as the rain thickened. No one came after her. No one apologized. But she didn't cry. She didn't shrink. Because this wasn't defeat. It was exposure. They hadn't removed her from their world. They had revealed the truth of theirs. Headlights cut through the rain. A black Tesla pulled up fast, sleek and silent. The driver's door swung open, and Charles stepped out without an umbrella. His eyes locked on Evelyn instantly. He rushed toward her, pulling off his coat mid-stride. "You're soaked," he said, wrapping it around her shoulders. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were tired. Her dress clung to her skin, but she was still standing tall. Charles cupped her face gently, his hands warm against the cold. "We're going back in," he said. "Right now. It's time." She looked up at him, rain streaking her cheeks like tears, but they weren't. This wasn't a rescue. It was a return. A moment so still, yet charged with everything they'd lived through. The wind, the silence, the injustice, all meeting right here at the edge of the sidewalk. And just like that, the story was no longer one-sided. They're going back in, but not how the gala expects. What do you think happens next when the woman they humiliated walks back into the room she paid for? Tap subscribe and don't miss what's coming. Because the real twist? It hasn't even started yet. Evelyn sat inside the car, the windows fogged from the rain and her breath. Charles watched her, silent, giving her space. She opened her clutch and pulled out a thick envelope. Her fingers, still damp, carefully slid the documents out, checking each page with quiet precision. Her eyes scanned the header, then the signature, then the final clause. No second thoughts. She took a breath, firm but calm, then looked at Charles. "I want them to see the face of the woman they stepped on." It wasn't anger in her voice. It wasn't even pain. It was something sharper, clarity, the kind that doesn't wait for justice. It becomes it. Charles nodded once. No words needed. The rain still tapped the roof, but inside the car it was still, like the moment before a verdict is read. And just like that, the energy shifted. This wasn't revenge, it was a reckoning. You've seen her humiliated, but now you'll see them exposed. If you think that envelope changes everything, you're absolutely right. Subscribe now and tell us below. What's really inside those papers? You might think you know, but trust us, this storm's just warming up. The doors opened again. Evelyn stepped in first. Charles just behind her, hand gently resting at her back. Her dress was still damp, her hair pulled tight. The coat draped over her shoulders belonged to a man no one dared ignore. The sound of glasses clinking stopped. The music faltered, then cut entirely. Heads turned. Whispers stalled mid-sentence. A dozen people froze mid-sip, eyes locked on the woman they had already erased. This time, no one questioned her place, because beside her stood the man who was the room's respect. Charles Moore, the billionaire, the philanthropist, the headline maker. And he had chosen her. The silence was louder than any protest. No one moved. No one smiled. Not even Clarissa. Because they all knew what that silence meant. They had made a mistake, a very public one. But Evelyn didn't walk in with rage or pity. She walked in with presence, and in that moment, drenched, proud, and absolutely unbothered, she was the most powerful woman in the room. Charles stepped forward, leaving Evelyn just a few feet behind. He walked up to the stage, not rushed, not hesitant. Every step quieted the room even more. The MC froze mid-sentence, microphone still in hand. Charles extended his own hand calmly. "May I?" The mic was passed without a word. Charles looked out at the crowd. Dozens of faces staring, some confused, others pretending not to be. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, voice steady. "But before this evening continues, there's something you all deserve to know." He turned slightly, motioning toward Evelyn. "This woman standing here is the reason any of you are in this room tonight." Gasps rippled, but no one spoke. The weight of the words was too immediate. She's the mind, the heart, and the soul behind the Moore Foundation. The scholarships, the outreach, the entire vision. He paused. And yet tonight, not one of you saw her, not for who she is. Silence. Some mouths hung open, others glanced sideways trying to understand what they'd missed. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She just stood still, exactly as she always had. Present, whole, unapologetically herself. Evelyn took a quiet step forward. Her hands didn't shake. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a simple manila folder, creased from use, not display. She opened it slowly. No need for drama. The silence carried its own weight. "I'd like to clarify something," she said calmly, "since it seems many of you are still unsure why I'm here." She held up a document. Her voice stayed even. "My name is Evelyn Moore. I'm the principal donor of this gala." A hush fell. Not a breath stirred. She unfolded the paper, revealing the signature page of a funding agreement. Clear, bold print showed her name. Next to the figure, 80%. "I funded 80% of this event," she said, letting the words land without rush. One man dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor. Clarissa blinked hard, her foot slipping half a step back. Her smile, so firm just moments ago, disappeared completely. Gasps rose like waves. But Evelyn didn't look smug. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just stood there, grounded, as if the room had finally caught up to the truth she always knew. She didn't need their recognition. Only their honesty. Clarissa took a breath, adjusting the pearl necklace at her collarbone. Her voice softened, but not out of humility, out of calculation. "If we had known you were Charles Moore's wife," she began, offering a tight smile, "things would have been handled differently." The room stayed quiet. Only the clinking of ice in forgotten glasses. Evelyn turned toward her. No anger in her face, just precision. "That's exactly the problem," she said. Clarissa's smile faltered. "If I hadn't had a powerful last name, you'd still see me as invisible, disposable, less than." Clarissa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Evelyn stepped closer, not threatening, just clear. "You didn't treat me poorly because you didn't know who I was. You treated me poorly because you thought I was no one." There was a pause, long and full. "And that," Evelyn added, "is why nothing you've said tonight means anything." Clarissa swallowed hard, mascara trembling under her eyes. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth, when spoken plainly, echoes louder than any shout. Evelyn reached into her clutch, pulled out a folded document, and held it up with a steady hand. The paper crackled as she opened it slowly, her voice even and unshaken. "For anyone still unsure of where they stand tonight, this might help." She paused. "I purchased this hotel 30 days ago." Gasps rippled through the room like glass shattering on marble. Some shifted in their seats. Others froze. You could hear the subtle clink of a fork dropped too fast. One woman's wine glass trembled in her hand. Clarissa blinked, visibly disoriented. The color drained from her face, and she instinctively took a step back. "This building, its staff, its policies, and yes, its guest list," Evelyn continued, "have all been under my name for 4 weeks." A long, breathless silence fell over the ballroom. Even the string quartet had stopped, and in that silence the hierarchy cracked. No one moved. No one interrupted. The woman they tried to remove had owned the room the entire time, not because of her husband, not because of her wealth, but because she never needed anyone's permission to belong. Evelyn didn't speak loudly, but her voice carried across the room like a stone dropped into still water. "You didn't insult me, Clarissa," she said calmly, holding the older woman's gaze. Clarissa stood frozen, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You insulted every soul you claimed to help." A hush swept over the ballroom. Evelyn's words didn't echo. They settled. "You turned compassion into theater. You raised money on the backs of the very people you refused to see. Women who fled war. Mothers who lost everything but hope. And tonight, you made them small again, through me." Clarissa's expression shifted. Pride cracking into confusion, then discomfort. And Evelyn stepped closer. Her voice didn't waver. "This wasn't about me fitting in. It was about you showing the world you still get to decide who matters." Clarissa opened her mouth, but Evelyn cut through gently. If kindness comes with conditions, it was never kindness. No one moved, not even the cameras, because everyone knew they had just witnessed the truth, spoken without apology. Evelyn turned slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd, then settling on one face. Lena. The young woman stood near the back, hands clenched together, trying to steady her breath. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she didn't look away. Evelyn took a step toward her, not to confront, to acknowledge. "You," Evelyn said, her voice softer now, "were the only one here who looked at me like a person." Lena blinked, her lip trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came, only tears. "I saw it," Evelyn continued. "Not pity, not fear, just human." The room was still watching, but it didn't matter. For a moment it was just the two of them. One woman speaking, another hearing what no one else dared to. Lena wiped her cheek, ashamed and proud at once. Evelyn gave the slightest nod. That one nod did not absolve. It didn't excuse the silence of others, but for Lena it was enough. Enough to know she hadn't stood by entirely unseen. And for Evelyn, it was proof. Small acts of courage still existed in the most unexpected places. Evelyn didn't say another word. She stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, no one moved, no one breathed. The orchestra, frozen mid-prep, never resumed. Silence clung to the room like thick velvet. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, wet fabric dragging behind her, her shoulders squared, her head high. Her dress was still soaked from the rain, clinging to her legs like a second skin, but she carried it like armor. Guests turned to watch her pass, some with guilt, others with awe, but no one dared speak. Clarissa stood motionless, lips parted, eyes following her like a ghost had just walked by. Lena wept quietly in the corner. Evelyn reached the grand doors, paused for just a breath, then pushed them open. Cold air rushed in. The city lights flickered beyond. She stepped out, swallowed by the night, not with shame, but with purpose. Inside, no one dared touch their champagne. No one raised a toast. She didn't need applause. She didn't need forgiveness. She had already taken back everything that mattered, her dignity, her voice, her name, and she walked away with all of it intact. Clarissa sank into the velvet chair behind her, suddenly weightless. The chatter had died. The clinking glasses had stopped. It was as if the air itself had gone still. She stared straight ahead, not really seeing anything. Her lips parted, but no voice came, only a whisper, barely audible. "What have I done?" No one answered. Around her, the other organizers avoided her gaze. One man quietly slipped away toward the exit. A woman folded her name badge and tucked it into her purse before following. Another stared at her shoes, ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. Clarissa gripped the armrests. Her fingers trembled. Everything she had built, the reputation, the image, the illusion, had cracked in public view. Not because of what Evelyn revealed, but because deep down she knew it was true. Every gesture she thought was kindness had come with a price. Every act of charity was tied to ego, and Evelyn had stripped it all bare. The silence was louder now. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was recognition. For the first time in a long while, Clarissa didn't feel powerful. She felt seen, and it hurt. Evelyn walked down the marble steps, the weight of the room behind her fading with each step. Her dress clung to her legs, still damp, but she moved with quiet grace, head high, shoulders steady. From behind her, hurried footsteps echoed. "Miss Evelyn!" a voice called. She paused. Lena ran up breathless, eyes glistening. Her hair had come loose from its neat bun, and her name badge swung as she moved. She looked younger now, stripped of pretense, just a girl full of something she hadn't felt all evening. Awe. "You don't even know," Lena said, voice cracking, "how many people you just saved in there." Evelyn didn't speak. She just looked at her, eyes soft. The cold night brushed past them. Somewhere in the distance a car horn echoed faintly. But here, in this moment, everything felt still. Lena waited, maybe expecting a speech, a wise reply, something to match the weight of what she'd just said. But Evelyn only smiled, gentle, full, unshaken. A smile that said, "I know, but I didn't do it to be seen." She placed a hand on Lena's shoulder briefly, then turned and walked into the rain. The kind of walk that doesn't need applause, just truth. The apartment was quiet, lit only by a soft amber lamp near the bookshelf. Rain tapped gently on the windows like a lullaby. Evelyn stepped inside first, her heels in one hand, her feet bare and cold against the wooden floor. Her dress clung to her legs, damp and heavy, but she didn't complain. She simply let out a long, tired breath. Charles followed, closing the door behind them. They hadn't spoken much on the ride home. There was nothing left to prove. Evelyn dropped her shoes by the door and leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest. His arms wrapped around her like they'd done 1,000 times before, familiar, steady, warm. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Silence spoke for her. Charles kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I've always believed in you, even more than I've ever believed in myself." She nodded against his chest, eyes closed. Her fingers found his and laced through. Their hands stayed like that, still interlocked. The world outside could keep spinning. Right here, right now, they had nothing to defend. Only each other. The hotel suite was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't calm. It echoes. Clarissa sat at her vanity, still in the gown from earlier. Her heels had been kicked off, one lying on its side across the rug. The clock read 2:17 a.m., but sleep had never come close. She stared into the mirror, not adjusting her hair, not fixing her lipstick, just staring. The same eyes she'd painted before the gala now looked unfamiliar, red, tired, unsure. Slowly, she reached for a cotton pad and began wiping the makeup from her face. Stroke by stroke, the armor faded. The foundation, the contour, the illusion. Her hand paused halfway through removing her mascara. Then, without warning, her shoulders shook. The first sob was quiet. The next was not. Tears rolled down her cheeks as if they'd been waiting for permission. Years of performance, undone in a single night. Clarissa looked back at her reflection, eyes raw. This wasn't guilt for being exposed. It was grief for realizing who she had become. And in that quiet, without lights or applause, the woman who built a legacy on appearances met the one thing she'd spent her life avoiding, herself. By morning, the internet had already erupted. A grainy, slightly shaky live stream clip was everywhere, on phones, tablets, TVs. First, Evelyn standing outside the gala in the rain, her soaked dress clinging to her frame as she's quietly escorted out. Then, hours later, the twist. Her return, her voice, her documents, her power. Every major outlet picked it up within hours. Billionaire's wife kicked out of gala, she secretly funded. She owned the building. They showed her the back door. When America looks in the mirror. The video racked up millions of views in just one day. Twitter threads dissected every expression, every word Evelyn said. TikTokers reenacted the confrontation. News anchors debated if this was classism, racism, or both. Some praised her as a modern-day Rosa Parks. Others said it was just a misunderstanding. But the tone was clear. Something had cracked open. One post went viral with 3 simple words. This is America. And under that, thousands of comments poured in. She walked through that door for all of us. My mother cried watching this. She said everything we've wanted to say. Evelyn hadn't planned to make a statement, but she did, and the world was listening. Camera crews waited outside Evelyn's apartment the next morning, their lenses aimed at the doorway like hunters waiting for a rare bird to appear. Reporters stood with notepads and mics, hoping to catch a soundbite. Some had flowers, others had gift baskets. Everyone had questions. But when Evelyn stepped outside, she wasn't dressed for a press tour. Just jeans, a gray cardigan, and the same earrings from the night before. Her hair was pulled back, face bare. She paused at the bottom step as a wall of voices erupted. Miss Moore, how did it feel to take the stage? Are you planning a foundation of your own? What would you say to the people who judged you? Evelyn raised one hand, and silence rippled through the crowd. I don't need to be celebrated, she said calmly. I need them to change. No follow-up, no soundbite rehearsed, just that. Then she walked past the cameras, didn't stop for more questions, didn't look back. Later that evening, a reporter would call it the most powerful non-interview they'd ever witnessed. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She had already been the story. Now she was focused on the work. Clarissa stood on the sidewalk, gripping the box of takeout like it was heavier than it was. It was a cold morning, gray sky, wind biting. Her coat looked expensive, but her eyes didn't match the fabric. They were tired, uncertain. Across from her stood the modest entrance to Moore Unity Shelter, its sign weathered but proud. A steady stream of volunteers came and went, carrying blankets, groceries, warm meals. People held the door open for one another without question. Clarissa didn't move. She stared at the door like it might judge her before she even walked through it. Her fingers tightened around the box, not out of fear of rejection, but of finally being seen with nothing to offer but humility. For years, she had written checks, given speeches, hosted galas, all without stepping foot in places like this. A little boy inside spotted her through the glass and waved. Clarissa blinked, startled. She almost smiled, but she didn't wave back. Not yet. She took a deep breath, shifted her feet, and took one slow step toward the door. She didn't know what she'd say, or if she'd be welcome, but for the first time in years, she wasn't looking for praise. She was looking for grace. The warmth inside the Moore Unity Shelter hit Clarissa like a wave. Laughter in the hallway, the smell of lentil stew, the sound of chairs scraping floors. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive. She stepped in hesitantly, holding the box with both hands. From behind the front desk, Lena looked up and froze. Clarissa almost turned around right then. Almost. Lena stood slowly. Her voice was steady, but laced with confusion. Mrs. Whitehall, what are you doing here? Clarissa cleared her throat. Her hands trembled just slightly. "I brought lunch." Lena blinked, still unsure, still guarded. Clarissa continued, her voice quieter now, stripped of titles and tone. "I didn't come to give a speech, or a donation." She looked around the room, children coloring, women folding clothes, a volunteer reading a book aloud. "I came to start over, if that's allowed." Lena studied her for a long moment, then stepped out from behind the desk. "Follow me," she said softly. "We'll start with the kitchen." Clarissa nodded, and in that moment, the woman who once hosted galas for applause followed a young shelter worker toward the back hall, ready to learn how to serve. Clarissa stood at the sink, hands stiff inside a pair of oversized rubber gloves. Steam rose from the dishwater, clouding her glasses slightly. Her designer blouse was hidden beneath an apron that smelled faintly of onions and bleach. She reached for a dish, but the gloves slipped. The fork clattered. Then, a ceramic plate slipped through her fingers and shattered at her feet. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Across the kitchen, a few heads turned, but no one yelled. No one rolled their eyes. A woman, maybe 70, maybe older, with soft gray curls and skin creased by years of sun and sorrow, stepped beside her. She wore an old cardigan with a missing button and held a towel like it was a badge of honor. She looked at Clarissa and smiled. "It's all right, sugar," she said, picking up the larger pieces. "You're here. That's the part that matters. You can learn the rest." Clarissa swallowed, cheeks burning. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman handed her a new plate, slower this time. Clarissa took it with both hands, steadier now. In that kitchen, elbow to elbow with strangers, she finally felt something new, useful, human. Evelyn stood just outside the kitchen, her figure framed by the glass panel in the hallway door. The hum of clinking dishes and muffled laughter drifted through the room, but she remained still, watching. Inside, Clarissa worked beside the older woman, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the heat and effort. She was focused, clumsy, still, but different. She rinsed a bowl slowly, set it on the drying rack, then offered a small smile when the woman beside her nudged her with approval. She looked like someone relearning how to be part of the world. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't open the door or draw attention to herself. She just watched for a few seconds longer. Then, with a breath so soft it barely left her lips, she gave a small nod. Not one of approval, not pity, but quiet acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "I see you. I see the trying, and that matters." Clarissa never saw her there, and Evelyn didn't need her to. She turned away, coat tucked under one arm, and walked down the hall, silent, composed, and at peace. Because some forgiveness doesn't need words, only witness. News headlines buzzed like a swarm. Aurora Foundation board under fire after gala incident. Key member resigns after leaked email reveals racially charged comments. Justice or public pressure? The line gets thin. The internet didn't forget. Screenshots, videos, receipts. An old interview surfaced, one board member's smug smile captured mid-sentence. Sometimes charity is about optics. That man was gone within 48 hours. A formal statement was posted to the foundation's site. "We condemn all forms of discrimination and are committed to rebuilding trust." Behind closed doors, the board scrambled. Meetings were held. PR teams went into overdrive. Donors threatened to pull out. Protesters stood outside their offices with signs that read, "Accountability isn't optional." And through it all, Evelyn stayed silent. A reporter caught her leaving the shelter one morning and asked, "Mrs. Moore, do you feel vindicated now that people are facing consequences?" She paused, adjusted the grocery bag in her arms, and replied gently, "I didn't ask for punishment. I asked for reflection. Justice. It finds its way, with or without applause." Then she walked on. No mic drop, no gloat, only grace. Clarissa stood in the doorway of the public library, her coat tucked neatly around her. The cold from outside still clung to her sleeves, but the warmth of the children's section spilled gently into the hall. Inside, Evelyn sat on a cushioned bench, surrounded by half a dozen kids from different walks of life, some squirming, some leaning in with wide eyes. Her voice flowed through the room, soft and rhythmic, bringing life to each page. And the little girl realized, Evelyn read, that bravery wasn't about being loud, it was about standing tall when it mattered most. A boy gasped. A little girl clapped her hands. Clarissa didn't move. She stayed near the door, clutching her bag like a shield. Her heels felt too loud for that carpet, her presence too foreign for that space. But she didn't turn away. She just stood still, watching. There was no fanfare, no confrontation, just a quiet moment where two lives, once colliding under chandeliers and judgment, now coexisted in silence. Evelyn didn't look up, or maybe she did and chose not to react, but something in Clarissa softened, not out of guilt, out of longing. She stood there until the story ended, then quietly stepped back into the cold. The press release was short, simple. More Foundation announces new program, the Adjoa More Women's Fund, empowering immigrant women through education and skills training. But the impact echoed far beyond headlines. At the launch event, there were no velvet ropes or chandeliers, just folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, and a banner handmade by the first recipients of the scholarship. It read in bold marker, "Thank you, Mama Adjoa." Charles stood at the front, hands folded as he looked over the room filled with women from Syria, Mexico, Haiti, Ghana. He took a breath and said, "My wife taught me what quiet strength looks like, but her mother, Adjoa, taught her how to carry it." He paused. "This fund isn't charity. It's a mirror. It reflects the power that already lives in every woman here. We're not giving a gift. We're honoring a legacy." Evelyn stood off to the side, her hands gently clasped in front of her. She didn't speak, didn't need to. A young woman in a headscarf approached her, holding a certificate. "My mother cleaned houses for 30 years, she whispered. "She said today felt like we finally arrived." Evelyn smiled, eyes shining. Because this was the real gala. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday. No return address, just Evelyn's name, written in careful cursive. Inside was a letter, handwritten in blue ink. The strokes uneven in parts, as if the writer had paused, erased, tried again. "Evelyn, I don't expect forgiveness. I barely forgive myself, but I needed you to know I found it. The handkerchief, the one you gave me that night, the one I tossed aside like it meant nothing. It didn't just smell like roses, it smelled like something older, like something my mother once had and I never understood. I kept it, I washed it, I held it, and I wrote this with it in my pocket." Folded inside the letter was the same handkerchief, creased, gently ironed, with faint traces of embroidered initials. A.M. Evelyn ran her fingers over the fabric, eyes soft but unreadable. She didn't speak, but she didn't throw it away either. She placed the letter in a wooden box by her bookshelf, next to other things that once hurt but no longer held power. And the handkerchief? She kept that in her pocket the next time she read to the children. Evelyn sat at her desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her, the letter from Clarissa folded neatly once again. She read it twice more, her expression unreadable, neither bitter nor forgiving, just still. Then she pulled out a small note card, cream-colored, the same kind she used to write thank-you notes to her students' families. She uncapped her pen, wrote one sentence, no salutation, no signature. "Real apologies are lived, not written." She didn't mail it. She tucked the card into the envelope that had carried Clarissa's letter, sealed it again, then placed it on the shelf above her desk, just beside a small framed photo of her mother, smiling in a faded head wrap, arms wrapped around a much younger Evelyn. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then stood, stretched her arms, and returned to her day. No speech, no grudge, no closure, just life, continuing. Some answers, Evelyn had learned, didn't need to be delivered. Some truths were meant to be watched. The invitation arrived in gold foil, elegant cursive spelling out Evelyn's name. "Guest of honor, Aurora Foundation Annual Gala." She read it once, then set it aside. The next morning, a courier delivered a shipment of 100 books to the Foundation's office. Each copy was carefully wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and labeled with a small white tag. "Read me, then read me again." Inside were titles ranging from The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin to Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. Essays, memoirs, stories not written for comfort, but for truth. On top of the stack was a handwritten note from Evelyn. "Understanding is the beginning of change. You don't need another gala speech. You need to listen harder. I won't be attending, but I've already sent the most important guests. These voices. No press release, no post on social media, just pages and silence. And, for the first time, the gala opened not with champagne, but with a reading circle. As Clarissa sat in the front row, Book in hand, eyes wide and quiet, a story began again. If you're still here, hit that subscribe button to follow Evelyn's journey and tell us, what book would you have sent to that gala? In the kitchen of More Unity Shelter, the air was thick with the scent of lentil stew and fresh bread. Stainless steel countertops gleamed under warm overhead lights. The once manicured hands of Chicago's social elite were now wrapped in plastic gloves. Clarissa stood beside two other women, Elaine and Meredith, both former gala queens in their own right. They worked in silence, scooping rice into trays, sliding plates down the line. Elaine shifted under the weight of a loaded tray, whispering just loud enough for Meredith to hear, "I once laughed at that woman. I thought she didn't belong in our world." Meredith nodded, eyes lowered. "Turns out, we didn't belong in hers." The comment hung between them, not bitter, not ashamed, just true. Behind them, a young girl from the shelter smiled as she carried her meal to a table, her braids bouncing with each step. The kitchen hummed with activity, but the shift was more than physical. It was spiritual. Once servers of champagne, now servers of purpose, and in the reflection of the soup kettle, Clarissa caught a glimpse of herself. Not the woman in designer gowns, but the one becoming. A quiet redemption, ladled one bowl at a time. A little boy, no older than 7, sat cross-legged on a bench near the kitchen doorway. His cheeks were smudged with chocolate, and his eyes followed Clarissa's every move as she stacked trays. He tugged at her sleeve. "Miss, were you ever poor like us?" Clarissa froze for a moment, a ladle in one hand, the other resting on her apron. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't curious. It was honest. She looked down at him, then crouched to meet his gaze. "No, sweetheart. I've never been poor like you mean." The boy blinked, confused. Clarissa continued, her voice softer. "But I was poor up here." She gently tapped her temple. "I was poor in the way I saw the world, in how I saw people." He tilted his head. "So, you're rich now?" A quiet smile touched her lips. "Now, I think I'm starting to be." Around them, the clatter of the kitchen continued, but time slowed just enough for the moment to settle in. Not dramatic, not grand, but real. Behind Clarissa, Lena looked up, just for a second, and nodded, as if to say, "Now she gets it." The evening sun dipped low, casting golden light across the wooden floor of their apartment. Evelyn stood by the window, watering a small pot of lavender. Behind her, Charles leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed loosely. He watched her in silence, then asked gently, "Have you forgiven them?" Evelyn didn't look back right away. She set the watering can down, let the silence breathe, then turned slowly. "I don't carry hatred, Charles," she said softly. "I carry hope." Charles tilted his head, listening. "I don't want them to feel what I felt," she continued. "That kind of emptiness, it poisons everything. I just want better for the next woman who walks into that room." He walked over and took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You've always been stronger than me," he whispered. "No?" she smiled. "Just stubborn in the right places." They stood together, eyes fixed on the fading skyline. In the distance, the city pulsed with movement. Cars, voices, possibility. And between them, no wounds. Only space for something new to grow. Forgiveness wasn't an act. It was a choice. And Evelyn had made it long ago. Evelyn walked slowly through the aisles of the library, her fingers brushing the spines of worn books with gentle reverence. The scent of old pages and quiet thought lingered in the air, like memory. She passed rows of readers, an elderly man mouthing the words of a poem to himself, a teenage girl scribbling notes in the margin of a borrowed textbook, a young boy resting his head on his mother's shoulder as she read aloud in soft whispers. Each face held a story. Each book, a mirror. Her hand paused on a copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. She didn't pull it from the shelf, just touched it. A quiet nod to where she'd begun. Looking around, Evelyn felt it. Not power, not pride, but presence. A deep, living truth. The world didn't need to know her name for her work to matter. It just needed space to heal. The library wasn't grand, but it was full of thought, of breath, of beginnings. As she reached the far wall and turned to look back, the sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, catching the gold edges of 1,000 pages. And Evelyn smiled. Clarissa stood in front of a small group of women, flipping through handouts on budgeting, apartment applications, and basic health care rights. Her tone was softer now, no longer instructing, but sharing. Lena stood beside her, distributing notebooks and translation guides in Haitian Creole, Arabic, and Spanish. A woman from Sudan raised her hand, her voice quiet. "How do you build credit?" Clarissa knelt beside her instead of answering from above. "You start with trust and small steps." Later, as the class ended and the women lingered in conversation, Lena turned to her. "I've worked with you for 2 years," she said, "but I've never seen you like this." Clarissa didn't answer right away. She looked around at the women chatting, laughing, helping each other pack up their things. Finally, she said, "I'm just seeing myself clearly, maybe for the first time." Lena smiled, a bit surprised. "It suits you." Clarissa nodded, almost shyly. Then she glanced toward the back of the room, where a mural of Evelyn's favorite quote had been painted on the wall. "Change doesn't start with noise, it starts with seeing." The room didn't feel like charity, it felt like community. The room where Aurora Foundation once held its closed-door meetings now looked very different. No more gilded chairs or crystal water glasses. The long table was replaced by a circle of mismatched chairs, plastic, metal, wooden, pulled from different parts of the community center. The founding members sat in silence as the new banner was raised behind them. It read, "The Collective Unity." Clarissa stood, her voice steady. "Today, we let go of who we were. Today, we open our doors, for real." A younger woman with a hijab nodded, holding a draft of the new charter. "No membership fees, no dress codes, no titles, no barriers." Someone else added, "Your work defines your contribution, not your bank account." A former Aurora member, once known for hosting exclusive brunches, raised her hand. "Will people believe us?" Clarissa met her gaze. "We won't ask them to. We'll show them." Outside the building, people from all walks of life gathered. Nannies, teachers, single mothers, refugees. Word had spread. Something new was forming. Inside, Clarissa took a deep breath and looked around the circle. The space no longer smelled of power or perfume. It smelled like paper, coffee, and quiet determination. This wasn't a rebrand. It was a rebirth. The community festival was buzzing with color, paper lanterns swinging gently in the breeze, children running with face paint, laughter rising above the music. On a small stage under a white tent, Evelyn stood with a warm smile, holding a microphone. She bent down to hand it to a young Syrian girl, no older than 9. The girl wore a faded pink dress and clutched a note written in uneven handwriting. Evelyn asked softly, "What would you like to say, sweetheart?" The girl looked out at the crowd. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "Thank you for letting us be here. Thank you for letting us dream." Silence fell. Then, waves of quiet applause. Evelyn didn't say a word. She simply knelt to hug the child. Behind them, the banner read, "More Community Festival, where everyone belongs." Lena wiped her eyes in the crowd. Clarissa, standing nearby, placed her hand over her heart. This wasn't just a moment for the girl, it was a declaration for every child who had once been told to stay silent, to stay small. Evelyn looked on, her eyes full, not of pride, but of peace. The future was already speaking, and it was being heard. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Charles found the letter. He had been sorting through a box of old books from his mother's attic, some faded classics, others untouched gifts. Inside the cover of Beloved by Toni Morrison, a single envelope slipped out. The handwriting was unmistakably his mother's. The paper, yellowed with time, was sealed but unmailed. That evening he handed it to Evelyn as they sat near the window, light spilling through the blinds. Evelyn opened it slowly. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still held their weight. "Evelyn, I was wrong. I saw you through a lens I was taught to wear, not through your heart. If this letter ever finds you, know that I was sorry long before I had the courage to say it." Evelyn sat still for a long time. No tears, just silence. She folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. "Even the ones who never say it aloud," she said, "sometimes still mean it." Charles reached for her hand. In that quiet moment, something old was healed, not with fanfare, but with understanding. Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, the letter unfolded before her. Outside, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. She read the words again, slowly, deliberately. Not because she hadn't understood them the first time, but because she needed to feel them. Every line carried the weight of years unspoken, and yet it was not bitterness that rose in her chest. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from anger, not from pain, but from a quiet affirmation. She whispered softly, to no one in particular, "I was enough. I was always enough." It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about something deeper, being seen, being recognized, not just as someone's wife or someone's guest, but as someone who had always belonged, even when others refused to see it. She folded the letter gently and tucked it into a small wooden box, the same one her mother once used to keep family keepsakes. Then she exhaled, long and slow. That night, for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't dream of proving herself. She simply rested, at peace with the truth she had always known. The small community hall was packed, not with donors in pearls and gowns, but with parents, teachers, and children holding books close to their chests. A hand-painted banner read, "Books for Belonging." Clarissa stood at the front of the room, a quiet microphone in hand. Gone were the designer heels, the rehearsed smiles. She wore flats and a navy sweater. Her voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "There was a time," she said, "when I looked at people and only saw difference. I thought I had all the answers, money, position, prestige. But I was empty." She paused, holding up a worn copy of The Bluest Eye. "It took a woman I misjudged to teach me how to listen, not just to people, but to their words, their pain, their hope, their stories." A murmur rippled through the room. "I'm not here to redeem myself," she added. "I'm here to pass the mic, to give shelves to voices I once overlooked." Children lined up with their favorite books. A Somali mother handed over a stack of bilingual readers. An older man dropped a dictionary with tears in his eyes. Clarissa stepped back and smiled, humbled. Change had finally found its voice. News anchors sat upright in their studio chairs, reporting with a tone that straddled astonishment and admiration. What began as a viral moment of public humiliation has quietly sparked something else, unity, one said. From the ashes of the last year's Moore Gala, a national conversation has emerged. Books, bridges, belonging. Clips rolled across the screen. Clarissa handing out books to children. Lena leading a workshop on tenant rights. Shelters painted with murals of women holding open books. A quiet revolution unfolding. When asked for comment, Evelyn declined every interview. She kept living her days as always, at the library, in classrooms, on sidewalks. But when she passed a store window and saw Clarissa on the TV screen, stooping to pick up a stack of donated books, sleeves rolled, sweat on her brow, Evelyn paused. For a second, the world softened. She smiled, not in pride but in quiet recognition. Some things don't need to be said aloud. Not every victory is loud, and not every answer comes with a microphone. Sometimes, real change looks like someone else lifting what you once carried alone. Lena stood by the library's front desk, eyes wide, hands slightly trembling. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single brass key. It gleamed in the morning light streaming through the windows, the same light that had once cast shadows on her own fears, now warming a new chapter. She placed the key in Lena's hand. "It's yours now," she said softly, "but don't hold this place too tightly. Don't make it just yours." Lena looked up, unsure. Evelyn's smile deepened. "Let it belong to everyone. Let it breathe. Let it grow." Outside, kids lined up for story hour. A teenager leaned on the railing with a backpack full of questions. A woman in a hijab asked for the job board. This place had become more than books. It was a map, a mirror, a home. Lena clutched the key, heart pounding with both fear and fire. "Thank you," she whispered. Evelyn just nodded and walked out, lighter somehow, not because she had let go, but because she had passed it on. Evelyn sat alone at her desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her. The light was soft, almost forgiving, as she unfolded a blank piece of paper and picked up her pen. At the top, she wrote, "To the girl I used to be, age 18. She paused, heart full, then wrote, "You thought you weren't enough, not smart enough, not graceful enough, not rich enough, but you were always more than enough. You just didn't know it yet. They'll call you names, they'll shut doors in your face, but you will hold your ground, and one day they will look at you and see what you always carried. Dignity. Fire. A heart that bends for no one but softens for everyone. And no, you won't become what they expect. You'll become something they never saw coming. You'll help others believe they're enough too, and one day you'll write this letter not out of regret, but out of love. Keep walking. Keep listening. The world will hear you." She folded the letter and placed it in a book she once read by candlelight. This was her final gift, Not to the past, but to every girl still doubting her place in the world. Evelyn walked out of the library, a book pressed gently against her chest. It was Beloved. The cover was soft with age, pages folded in places only she remembered. Behind her, the city stretched wide and lit, alive with noise she no longer feared. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything she had fought for was still inside those walls, on the shelves, in the children's voices, in the way people now spoke to each other with less distance. Her steps were steady. There was no need to hurry anymore. Somewhere deep in her memory, she could still hear the girl she once was, afraid, unsure, unseen. But tonight, Evelyn wasn't walking as her past self. She was walking as the woman who had rewritten the ending. And the world had noticed. They used to judge her by her shoes, her dress, her silence. Now they listened. Because sometimes the loudest revolutions begin with the quietest women.